have a treat today. This is World War II Project Day. We have in studio with us Dr. John Farrington. He served in the Pacific Theater in World War II in the infantry. Dr. Farrington, John, it is great to have you here.
It's good to be here with you.
Okay, we had an adventure. I just love the conversation. Picked you up in Boulder, and we drove over. So thank you for joining us in studio.
I'm glad you're going to put up with me.
Well, you better be good. I may not take you home. You know?
Okay. It's a long walk.
It's a long walk, that's for sure. Dr. John Farrington, you served in World War II in the Pacific Theater. Let's start with, where were you when you heard that Pearl Harbor had been bombed?
Well, three of us had decided to go to a movie that afternoon, and we were walking down 13th Street in Boulder, and right at the corner of 13th and Cascade, we stopped to pick up my dear friend Jimmy Carr, and he came out of his home and he says, "My gosh, the Japs have just bombed Pearl Harbor." And being very knowledgeable boys of 14, we walked on down the street and decided this cannot last more than 6 weeks because the Japs are no good anyway, and we'll just take them into camp. And we went to the movie, and I have no idea what the movie was that day, but they did show the newsreel of the two Japanese diplomats that had come to Washington to buy a little extra time and lie to the president and to the Secretary of State while their ships were getting in range of Hawaii. But at that moment, the entire audience began to boo, and they stopped the newsreel right on the spot and went right into the comics.
Wow.
And
So we got home, and my parents were very upset.
Mm-hmm.
Well, this is so interesting. You're actually from Boulder, Colorado, right
Correct.
here in our backyard. And
Right.
you're at the movie theater. Okay, so you hear that the Japanese just bombed Pearl Harbor. You get out of the movie, you go home, and what were your parents saying? What was,
They were glued to the radio, and they were very upset that another war was starting. Both of them had memories of World War I, and they just didn't think this was going to be a quick war.
yeah.
They just felt we were probably going to get dragged into the European War at the same time.
Mm-hmm. And Dr. Farrington, did you have family members who had fought in World War I?
No, my father was in medical school at that time, and when he was called by the draft board, they said, "Look, you're in medical school, we want to keep you there, and we're going to put you in a reserve unit and make you an acting second lieutenant. You can stay in medical school." So he missed it, except he was in charge of a influenza hospital for a period of time, which was fascinating to him. And of course, then the war was over, and he never did serve in active duty as a medical officer.
Well, Dr. Farrington, your father felt comfortable with the reserves.
Yes.
So tell our audiences about your experience with your father and how you ended up getting into the military service.
Well, from the time I was a little guy, I always knew that I wanted to be in the infantry. Little kind of off my rocker, I guess. But when the war started, I graduated from high school. He announced that I was going to go to summer school and get out of high school in 2 months, or 2 years rather, and maybe I could get into the university and get into pre-med. I wanted to be a doctor anyway, and then I could maybe avoid the draft. That was his plan. So I went off to...
And you were the only son?
I was the only son.
Yep.
And I understand his concern about being drafted and getting into the infantry and going into combat and all those things. But I went off to the University of Colorado Boulder. I got saddled with 18 hours of physics, inorganic chemistry, Shakespeare, a whole bunch of stuff. And I really wasn't ready to go, and I really didn't want to be there. I wanted to be playing football with my friends down at Boulder High.
But of course.
And they won the state championships the year I left.
Oh.
But I stuck it out. I didn't flunk out. But I turned up this program. Now, the Navy had the V-12 program, which was a college program for new Navy personnel that were going to become officers. They also had a V-5 program, was for young men who were going, and young men, no women in those days, who were going to become pilots. And the Army came up with their own ASTP, Army Specialized Training Program, for people that could come into the Army, and they were training as veterinarians, doctors, or just general education to become officers. But I turned up this program that was a reserve program. that I could get into when I was 17, and they would send me to school, and they would pay all the tuition, buy the books, put me up, feed me, and all those good things. So I went home with all the papers, and I said, Dad, I've turned up this reserve unit. That they'll send me up to Fort Collins. I can go to school up at Colorado A&M in those days, and they will pay all the expenses, and I won't be that far from home. I can come back. I come down on some weekends. And he thought that was a wonderful idea that I would get into a reserve unit. So he signed all the papers. I forgot to tell him one thing. They were terminating the program.
Oh.
And I knew this all along. So at the end of I also told him, though, when I became 18, that I was going to have to take some more basic training. And so he said, that's fine, we'll put up with that. But it was all over, and I went down went home for a couple of weeks, and then went down to Fort Logan to be inducted into the regular Army. And I was not a volunteer, I was not a draftee, so I really was in the regular Army. And I had to take a little interview with a non-commissioned officer, not more than a couple of minutes.
You know, Dr. Farrington, this is such a great story. We're going to be going to break, so let's have everybody just wait through break to hear the conversation that you had with this officer as you were entering the military in World War II. We're talking with Dr. John Farrington. It's Friday and World War II Project Day with the Americhicks, Molly and Kim.
We'll be right back. Stick with us.
He's telling us about how he got into the Army. So before we went to break, Dr. Farrington, you said that you had gotten down to Fort Logan, and you're having this conversation with this officer. How did that go?
Well, he was an old sergeant. He'd been in the 7th Infantry Division up in the Aleutian Islands and fought up there. And he had a combat infantry badge on 3 rows of ribbons, and I only recognized the Purple Heart. And he looked at me and he said, well, sonny boy, what are you good at? And I could have said I can type, which was true, or I worked in a hospital, and that was true. And I just looked at him and said, I can shoot a rifle as good as anybody you've ever seen, and I love to camp out. And he says, you're also crazy, with a few little words to follow that, but you're in the infantry. And I thanked him and got up and left. And so pretty soon I was called out. My name was called. I got on a train, and we headed out of Fort Logan south along the old Colorado and Southern route, Denver, Fort Worth, and Pacific it was in those days, and finally turned east in the middle of the night and ended up in Little Rock, Arkansas a day and a half later. And I started taking my infantry basic training at Camp Joseph D. Robinson. And I found that basic training was fun. It was interesting. I had demonstrated some leadership skills when I was up at Fort Collins, and I was made the acting company commander up there. And down there, I ended up being the acting platoon officer of our training group. And I found it a lot of fun. It was challenging both intellectually and physically. The physical part I loved. The intellectual part I found stimulating. I was trying to always think ahead. My dad told me always think around the corner or over the hill. And I found in basic training you had to do that. And it was really something that I enjoyed. One time I was leading this platoon of men through, we had to attack a machine gun position up on a hill.
Now, where at?
This was in Arkansas.
Okay.
This was just strictly
During training, okay.
blank ammunition, but it's part of our training. And I looked at the map, and I could pick out a gully. We could work our way up to a group of scrub oak. And as we got up there, we started crawling through the scrub oak, and I had the guys on either side of me, and I was giving them hand signals. And all of a sudden, my eyes stopped as I looked forward, and here was a copperhead snake coiled up looking at me. And so I just stopped where I was, looked at the snake, and pointed to the guy next to me, and pointed to me, and then pointed to him, so he was to take over, and I pointed to the snake. And his eyes got rather large, and he nodded that he would take over the platoon and start moving it forward, and they did. And all I had was an M1 rifle with a bayonet on the end of it, so I held it out in front of me and kind of mesmerized the snake as I got the bayonet over him, turning it one way or another, and then finally dropped it on him and started sawing.
Oh my gosh!
Just right on the neck, right behind the head,
It
right?
was a little further down than that,
Okay.
but I got him where I could. And I finally got him sawed in so he was immobile, but his upper part was still interested in me. And I heard the attack going on up there and figured everything had come out right. And then my sergeant hollered, "Farrington, where are you? Did you sleep down there?" And I said, "Be right out, Sergeant." By then I got above him and stuck the bayonet right at the base of his skull. He was a pretty good sized snake. And I didn't know the sergeant was afraid of snakes.
We'll talk about giving some leadership skills when you let them go ahead and you go after the snake with a bayonet. They're like, "I'm following this guy into World War II." Heck yeah.
So you brought it out, though.
Brought it up, showed the commanding officer of our company came over and asked what was going on, and I told him what I'd done. He said, "Well, you did just right." And they asked me to go to officers candidate school at that point, and I turned them down.
Wow.
I got to thinking a 19-year-old second lieutenant taking over an infantry platoon of seasoned old men, all in their 20s, who had been in the field for a while, that doesn't make any sense to me at all.
Mm-hmm.
So I turned him down. I just said, "No, I'm not ready for that yet."
Okay.
And the training ended up, came home on furlough. I went to Fort Collins to see my girlfriend, off and on through that 2 weeks, and then finally jumped on a train and ate Thanksgiving dinner of 1944 going across the Great Salt Lake Causeway, and ended up at Fort Ord, California, where I told my father I was going to have to take some more training. He wondered what was happening to my educational thing, and I said, "Well, I don't know. I haven't heard anything yet, but I'll be going out to Fort Ord to take some more training." Well, the training out there was how to make a combat landing amphibiously, how to shoot a Thompson submachine gun, a few other things that were kind of fun.
Gosh, Dr. Farrington.
And then one night we got on a train and headed for San Francisco. And I got on it was called the Sea Ray. It was a C-3 cargo ship that had been converted to a troop carrier, 2,300 men on board. And we sailed on the morning of December 18th, 1945, and went under...
Or 1944, right?
44, I'm sorry, yeah, 44. Mm-hmm. And we sailed out under the bridge, and I stood on the deck, and I said, "I'll see you again sometime." And we sailed southwesterly, and our first landfall was the Solomon Islands.
Wow.
And we went by Guadalcanal. And that was important for me because I had two friends that had fought down there. One, Dave Guffey, who had survived, came back in pretty good health. Another one that didn't make it down there. And then we, next landfall was Finschhafen, New Guinea, which is right down on the tail of New Guinea. And we were there about 6 hours, and we went up along the coast of New Guinea to Finschhafen, New Guinea. And we sailed into that harbor, which is a huge harbor. And I looked around and I thought, I don't know what those Japs are thinking about because they can't beat us. This harbor was wall-to-wall shipping, all sorts, tankers, troop ships, naval vessels. And then all of a sudden something happened one afternoon. We were there about 2 weeks with no air conditioning and poor ventilation. And just swinging an anchor out there. And all of a sudden they called general quarters, which meant you put on your life vest and you went on deck and get ready to evacuate the ship. And we could see these naval vessels darting around through all the other ships, and then some explosions. And later on we found out a Japanese submarine had come in and fired 3 torpedoes. And one of them had hit a munition ship not far from us, but it hadn't exploded. One ran up on the beach and didn't explode, and one hit a little rocky outcropping and did explode. The Navy did get the submarine. But after a while, we joined a convoy and we started sailing north by northwest. Somebody said, "Where are we going? Where do you think we're headed?" And I thought to myself, "There's only one place where U.S. troops are in this area, and that's called Leyte in the Philippine Islands." And sure enough, we ended at Leyte. The food on the troop ship was terrible. We had 2 greasy meals a day. They were just awful. That's a whole new story. It takes an hour to tell. But we got there and we went to the 4th Replacement Depot and ended up, the first thing I did was to dump my duffel bag down on a bunk and the Army cot and headed for the chow line. And it tasted so good. My 5th time through the chow line, a sergeant grabbed me and says, "You've been here before, we're running out of food." Well,
What was so different about the food then?
it was good. It was hot. It was not greasy. It was, for what we'd been eating,
Yeah.
this was superb. I thought we were 4+ Russians, 4-star Russians. But we started doing some basic training there, marching and keeping in fit. And your name was called every so often, and my friends kept disappearing and getting on trucks at night to go wherever they were going. And one night my name was called. I got my duffel bag, and as I started to get on the truck, somebody chalked something on my helmet. And I have always been a history buff. And when I was in high school, I had read a history of the Lost Battalion, 2nd Battalion, E Company's 2nd Battalion of the 308th Infantry Regiment, the 77th Infantry Division. And I decided that was a division I would like to get on, or become a member of. And they emerged on Guam, they emerged on Leyte, and when he got on the truck and went down the road in the middle of the night, I took off my helmet, looked at it, and here's the 77 chalked on my helmet.
Oh my gosh, wow.
And I thought, this is what I've always been after. And I got to this bivouac area, and 4 of us got off the truck there. And there was a sergeant there and a corporal, and some tents had been pitched, and that was it. We were told where to eat, get our meal down the road a piece. So we slept on the ground in a tent, which is not all that comfortable, even when you're 18. And I asked the sergeant where we might get some cots. He said, "I'll go down the road, you'll find one someplace." It was a little bit after dark. This was about the 3rd night. We did find a truck with some cots in it, which we appropriated. I'm sure that the people that lost their cots that night were a little bit upset with us. But
Did they ever try
But
to
they
come
never
and
found you.
reappropriate them? Reappropriate
no,
them?
that's called a midnight requisition.
I got it.
But about that time, the company came offline. They'd been fighting up on Leyte. And when they got off the trucks, I looked at these men and thought, this is not the time to start asking questions. Just stand back and wait until you're called. They looked terrible. They were dirty. They hadn't shaved in several days. Hair hadn't been cut. Their uniforms were dirty, fatigue uniforms. Their rifles were clean. And they started milling around finding places to sleep, and all of a sudden, magically, a whole bunch of cots thrown up. So we all had cots to sleep on. But then my name was called, and the first sergeant, whose name was Janus, who had been world champion duckpin bowler at one time in his life, called me and he said, "Farrington," and he looked at me and said, "What are you doing here?" I said, "Well, I enlisted." He said, shook his head, he hollered, "Ostrowski, come over here, we got a child for you." And Ostrowski was 38 and I was 18, and he was going to be my squad leader. He was a sergeant, and it was a 60 millimeter mortar squad. And he looked at me and said, "Sonny boy, I don't understand how they let you get here." And I said, "Well, Pops," and I thought, you don't call your sergeant Pops. But after that, he was always Pops and I was always Sonny boy. And I learned a tremendous amount from that man. And we started training then. One day they got us all around a map and they showed us this funny looking little island. It was called Zamamishima. It was in the Karamaretto, which is just off the southern tip of Okinawa. And we were supposed to invade that on March 26, 1945. And I thought to myself, my mother's going to have a fit when she reads this in the newspaper, because that's my 19th birthday. And pretty soon we were on in a convoy headed north. We had a little trouble with the ship we were on. It ran over reef during so-called dry runs, and we had to transload onto another ship, so we lost we were supposed to be the first wave into the Zamamishima, but because of the accidents, the ship delayed to get us out. We were the second wave. But as we sailed north, I knew this was going to be a pretty good operation because there were 3 aircraft carriers with us, along with destroyers and destroyer escorts.
Okay. You know, we're talking with Dr. John Farrington. We're coming into break here. So let's go ahead and do that, Molly. And when we come back, we're going to hear about I can't pronounce the name. Sarashimi, is that
No,
right?
Zamamishima.
Zabamashima. Okay.
Hey, it's the Americhicks, Molly and Kim. If you are just tuning in, we are about to get to the third segment of the 4 segments of World War II Day. We're in studio right now at KDMT 1690 AM. Turn it on your radio, but keep this on live on Facebook. We're about to come back to the next segment. We're talking with Dr. John Farrington, and he fought in the Pacific Theater at the Battle of Okinawa in World War II. So stick with us.
Studio, we have Dr. John Farrington, who fought in the Pacific Theater, World War II. And we are to the point where, Dr. Farrington, you are going onto the shores of Zamamashima, correct?
Correct.
Now, right before you went into that battle, what happened? Christmas Day.
Christmas Day, by act of Congress, we all had turkey and all the trimmings. This was on the troop ship in the middle of the Pacific. And unfortunately, the turkey was tainted, and 2,300 men had diarrhea without the facilities to handle it.
Oh.
Fortunately, I got sick early in the morning and managed to get a seat.
Front row and center, sir, this one's taken.
But I got up on deck finally when it all passed through, and guys were using their gas masks
Oh.
and throwing them overboard. Using their steel helmets and throwing them overboard, the helmet liners. And a Japanese ship could have followed us for miles for the debris that was.
Yeah.
But this too passed.
Yeah.
And we were weaker but wiser after that.
Yeah. I guess turkey in the middle of the Pacific, there might be those potential problems.
That's right.
Stick to fish.
Yeah.
So with Dr. John Farrington, before we went to break, you were telling us it was March 26, 1945, your 19th birthday. You're on a convoy headed north, and your goal is to invade Zamamashima.
Correct.
All right. Tell us what happens from there.
Well, we got up, and the first thing you do is to shave, shower, get all cleaned up, put on a brand new uniform from inside all the way out, socks and everything except your boots. Check your weapons, get your ammunition, make sure your pack is properly packed. And being an ammunition carrier at that point on mortar squad, I had to get 9 rounds of 60 millimeter mortar ammunition, which is not light. And get up on deck, and pretty soon we're swinging over the side of the ship. And I look up, and here's a medical officer, and he said, "I wish I were hunting ducks on the Platte River today." I said, "Are you from Colorado?" He said, "I'm a pediatrician from Denver." I said, I'm from Boulder, and I hope I never see you again." And I went down, dropped into a Higgins boat, and we took off for the beach. And the company landed as one group. The boats all hit the beach at the same time. The ramp came down. We got up to the seawall, and Captain Pickersgill said, "We're all here, let's go." And we went over the seawall and started running through this little Samami town. And I grew up real quickly as we ran through the town. I looked off to the left, to my right, and there were 3 dead American soldiers lying there with ponchos over them. And it really changed my life. I knew I was going to be a good soldier. I knew that I had the ability, the training to do it, but all of a sudden you're face to face with the fact that this is not Boy Scout camp.
Yeah.
And we got up to a ridge where we were supposed to dig in and create backup. And I started digging my first foxhole there. And I've always enjoyed digging and working in good, clean dirt. But this dirt was not clean.
Not clean.
And I didn't realize why until I got to Japan and saw their plumbing system up there. They had something we called a honey dipper. There's a man with a 2-wheeled cart and an ox and a big vat on the back, and he'd go into each house, he'd carry out the crock of human stuff and dump it in this, and they used it for fertilizer and changed the soil forever. And that first night, it was quiet, but it rained, and our foxhole filled up with water, and we were bailing all night long, but it wasn't keeping up with it. And then the next night, things kind of settled down and dried off, and we improved our drainage system in our foxhole. And walk about 4:30 in the afternoon, everything was quiet, and the old guys were standing around on this ridge talking. And I thought, I'll go over and see what they're talking about. Maybe I'll learn something. And I got over there and listened for a while, and I thought, well, I'll go back to my foxhole and get a drink of water. I'm thirsty. And as I started back, I heard an 81 millimeter American mortar fire round down in the town behind us. And I stopped just out of training, and I listened, and I could hear the shell go over. and blow up in the valley below us. So I took a few more steps and I heard it fire again, and I stopped and I couldn't hear anything. And I looked up, and here the shell came right down on our position. It was a white phosphorus shell, and I hollered short round, which we call it. It's not friendly fire. There's nothing friendly about it. And everybody dove for cover. And I remember flying through the air, headed for my foxhole, and seeing this beautiful plume of white phosphorus exploding behind me. And I hit the ground and immediately jumped up and started stripping off my battle jacket, because I figured I probably was going to be burned if I didn't get it off. And then I turned around and saw Sergeant Ostrowski trying to slap out the fire. And I went up to try to help him. He wanted to wait for the medic, and I said, I know how to handle this. I'll get some water and pour it on there. And he wouldn't let me do it. And then he went to the next guy. But everybody in my squad was wounded that afternoon except me. And when I finally got to my battle jacket, I found a shard of shrapnel had gone through the arm and sliced it open, and that there had been some white phosphorus burned a couple holes in the back. But because I was 19, had good training, and I was quick, I kept from being one of the casualties. And about that time, we got everybody going down the hill to the aid station. The lieutenant came over, and he was a battlefield promotion. He was a good man. He'd been a sergeant, but he'd excelled in leadership skills. They made him a second lieutenant. And he said, who's in charge here? And I looked around and I said, well, I guess I am, sir. I'm the only one left. He said, set up that mortar and aim it at the curve in the road down there. And I looked around, and here's a guy that came overseas with me who was about as dumb as I was. And I said, set up the mortar and aim it for the curve in the road. And the lieutenant said, what did you say? I told him to set up the mortar and aim it to the curve of the road. He said, who do you think you are? I said, well, I think I'm the squad leader. He said, you're right. Act like one. So I grabbed my rifle, and there's this long sloping grass slope that went sharply down the hill, and I ran down that part of the hill and looked over. Here came a company of American troops up the road, and I jumped up and went like this, and the lieutenant hollered, you better be right. I said, I am.
And for everybody listening on the radio that didn't see his hands, he was waving, no, no, don't come up here.
Oh, no, no, don't shoot.
Don't shoot,
don't shoot. Don't shoot. And went back up, and by then everybody was gone, but I was squad leader for 24 hours, and Sergeant Ostrowski came back up the hill again, all bandaged up from his burns. He said, Sonny boy, I wasn't going to leave you up here all by yourself. And I learned something then, too. But we stayed on Zamamishima for several months, no, just several weeks, cleaning out the suicide boats, establishing a radar station.
Dr. Farrington, now what, I haven't heard of a suicide boat before, so what was that exactly?
That was a little one-man speedboat. It was probably about 12 feet, 14 feet long, had a big engine in it, and had about 500 pounds of explosive in the bow of it. They were in caves along the water line, and the reason we knew they were there is the photographs showed tracks that led down into the water, and they're in these caves. And the idea was when the ship, Allied ships came in, the suicide pilot of the boat was to run them down into the water, start the engine and run it out and slam it into the side of the ship and blow a hole in it. Mm-hmm. They were not very nice people. Mm-hmm. But we got those all cleaned out, and about the fourth night we were there, we were told not to worry about any airplanes, that they're all going to be ours. And all of a sudden, it was just getting dusk, and by then the Navy had moved a tremendous number of ships, repairs, resupply ships into this harbor, and we could hear this airplane coming, wide open, full power in a dive. We thought, gee, that's kind of interesting. Looked up, and the thing went right over us and went down and slammed into a ship. This was the first Japanese kamikaze that we'd seen. They'd flown out of Japan. Their job was to go die for the emperor. My job was to help them. But we were on Zamamishima for a while then, and turned it over to some other troops and went over to Tokushima, which was another little island, and we were to secure that island to take Japanese Okinawan civilians who were being evacuated from Okinawa. We turned that over to another group and then went over to Okinawa to fight. And when we got there, we went immediately up online, and our company was tied into the left flank of the Marine Corps company right at Shuri Ridge. And we fought alongside them for several days. An interesting thing happened. That's when I became aware of the Brown Shoe Navy. Now, nobody knows about the Brown Shoe Navy. Well, the Navy traditionally wears black shoes. But they were resupplying some of the Marines by air because they got cut off. And this one TBM bomber came in a little bit off course. And as he opened his bomb bay to drop the supplies out, some Jap just laced him right down the middle with a machine gun. He caught on fire.
Okay, Dr. Farrington, it's break already, Molly.
Yeah.
This is going way too quickly, so hold that thought. We're going to go to break. We want to hear the balance of this story. We are the Mayor Chicks, Molly and Kim. It's World War II Project Day. We're with Dr. John Farrington.
Yep, thanks for listening, KDMT 1690 AM, and we are live on Facebook right now. Check us out at Americhicks on Facebook, and our website's americhicks.com. We'll be right back. Hey, we're back here, and real quick, we have somebody that's listening to us on Facebook Live. Thanks. If you're not, check it out on Americhicks Facebook, and we're live right now on KDMT 1690 AM.
Hi, Ralph.
Hey, Ralph. Ralph Peters is a friend of ours in the Netherlands, and he's listening, and he sees that Dr. Farrington from World War II, his hat says 77th Infantry Division, and said, ask him about Hacksaw Ridge. So here it goes.
I was not on Hacksaw Ridge. I was somewhat west of there at that time. That was a outfit from the 306th Infantry Regiment. About that time, we'd been pulled out from the Marine Corps position down there at Shuri and sent off to bail out some people from the 96th Division. This time I saw Japanese soldiers run up with explosives and fall down under the tanks and blow up the tanks. And we had two very, very active days of combat there. And during the second afternoon, one of our sergeants, Sergeant Mayer, got a little bit angry at the Japanese and grabbed the machine gun off the top of the tank and started waiting, getting all cramped into the end of the island. You know, start shooting each other. And we were pulled back and put in a convoy of LSTs, a land ship tank. They're great ships to ride on. They're flat bottom, but they're stable. And the whole division pulled out of the Okinawa area and headed south then for the Philippines.
Wow. Okay, so has the atomic bomb been dropped?
No,
Right. Okay,
no.
So where are you at in time-wise now?
We're we finally got to the Philippines and landed on Cebu Island, a beautiful island where the Spanish had first occupied. And the first night we had to spend it on the beach, and then we had to clean out this area to form our bivouac area, but it turned out to be a pineapple patch. And we ate our way through it.
That
It
sounds
was really
lovely.
great.
Finally, a wonderful treat.
But we had about a week off to kind of rest up, and then we started training for the invasion of Japan.
Okay.
And we did have a radio by then. It was on a little shelf that had been nailed into the side of a coconut palm. It was protected by a poncho so it wouldn't get wet in the rain. And I was getting cleaned up to go to bed. I'd been on KP that day, and you know, washing dishes and things like that. I still do that at home.
Good man.
You're a good man.
If
That's where it
Mary
came
man
from.
cooks, I wash up, and if I cook, she washes
That
up.
was,
But somebody was listening to the radio. We could use it an hour a night. He said, "The war's over." Or I'm sorry, ahead of myself. They dropped a new kind of a bomb. We all went down and listened, and it was actually said it was an atomic bomb. It did tremendous destruction, and we thought, "What's that?" And somebody said, "Well, you've been to college. What's an atomic bomb?" And I said, "I have no idea, but if it helps, it's going to be nice." And a couple days later, they said they dropped another one of those things. And a couple days later, we were listening to the radio and said the war's over. And there was no cheering. We were shaking hands, patting on the back. We didn't want to fight our way to Japan. That would have been a terrible bloodletting. But we all went to bed. We kept guards out. We had to have them out. The Americal Division was still fighting the Japanese up on the north end of that island, and we didn't want to make any mistakes. But so we began to get ready to leave and go to Japan.
Okay, and so Okinawa is the southernmost bigger island in Japan, right?
Yeah.
Okay, and so you were on Okinawa then?
Yeah, right. And it was part of Japan.
Yeah, okay. And tell us the story regarding when you had gotten on that train and gone out into the countryside, and you had seen, the destruction and.
Oh, after I'd ended up in way northern Japan. I got out of the infantry because I got tired of standing guard at 2 o'clock in the morning in a blizzard, and I wanted to be a doctor anyway. So I went to the aid station, and the guy put me on immediately. But when I got to Yokohama. I looked up an aid station and started working there, but one afternoon I got on a streetcar in downtown Yokohama and rode it to the end of the line. By the time we got there was the motorman, the conductor, and me, and we'd gone through mile after mile of absolute devastation. Houses were burned. There was nothing you could see. But I began to notice in houses there were machine lathes, and there were drill presses, and there were milling machines. And to the Japanese, much of the war effort was a cottage industry. We knew this before because the parts on their rifle were not interchangeable. A Japanese rifle was made as a rifle, and if a part broke, you had to find a new one because you couldn't take the same part out of an old rifle. Whereas the M1 rifle, you could take parts out of any of them and interchange them. So, you say, what did we do to the Japanese civilians? Well, what is a civilian in an all-out war? Now, the devastation from the atomic bombs has always been said to be terrible, but it was the two before that got the mule's attention. You have to hit them between the eyes twice sometimes to make them understand what they're supposed to do. But the devastation from the firebombing of the Tokyo, Yokohama area and other areas took far, far more casualties than did the atomic bombs. And for us, I'll always be grateful to President Harry Truman for making that decision, because it was a tactic that was designed to end the war.
And it saved both Japanese lives and a tremendous amount of American lives.
Right.
Yeah. I think it's really important, Molly, that people understand that. As we have gone into the next generations, I don't think that kids have totally understand the truth about what happened on that. So, Dr. Farrington, thank you, because, war is hell. It really is.
Hell.
It is. But there was a good guy and there was a bad guy.
Yep.
You know?
It depends on which side of the line you're on, who was good or who was bad.
Well,
Well, I tell you, depending, right now with our military, it seems like lately, up until this year, we'd send our military in somewhere, in another country, but it didn't seem like there was an actual strategy to win or an actual strategy to end the fight.
Mm-hmm. That's true.
And why, and we can't do that. When we go to war, you've got to have a plan, don't you think?
That's right. Let's get back to the brown shooting India for a minute.
Oh, yes.
Yeah,
we're going to be out of time, so yeah,
This
definitely.
thing skidded to a stop about 100 yards in front of our lines, and just behind the Japanese lines. And without anybody saying anything, we jumped up and started running to this airplane. And the canopy came off, and these three airmen jumped out, and we were hollering at them. But as we ran through the Japanese line, we kind of cleaned it up too. So we advanced our line, which helped the Marines on the other side of us. And here these three guys came, absolutely clean, well-shaven, haircuts, uniforms clean, and they had brown shoes on. And the Navy airmen all wore brown shoes, where the traditional Navy wore black shoes.
Huh.
That trivia is of no consequence.
Well, but very, very
But
fascinating.
now we know and
Yeah,
we can win that.
Dr. John Farrington, we're just about out of time. This has just gone way too quickly, so thank you for this fabulous interview. What would you like to say to our listeners, to our young people out there right now in America?
The future is yours. This is a great nation. When I started first grade, after taking roll, Miss Nelson said, "You all stand and put your hands over your heart." And she did it to show us what to do. And she said, "Now we will learn the Pledge of Allegiance." And we spoke the Pledge of Allegiance every day of school till I was in the 9th grade. We knew patriotism. We celebrated November 11th, Armistice Day, with a reading of the names from Uni Hill High School, or Uni Hill's grade school, who died in World War I. We grew up loving this country. Now, that doesn't mean that the country is always good, and we've done some things that have been horrible in the past. But the Constitution of the United States is something that most people in the world would envy to be able to live under. The Bill of Rights are outstanding. And I just read a book called the Know Your Bill of Rights book, and I would recommend it to all of you. It goes through all of the Bill of Rights. It also says why they're there and why they're there. And we do have a way of changing the Constitution. It's not changed by presidential edict, by Congress, or by the Supreme Court, although there has been some messing with the Constitution in those various areas. But there is a way, if you don't like what's going on, you can change it. And if you want to dissent in an intelligent, well thought out way with a plan. And you can be heard in this country. And the plan has to be something you can take to the other side and sit down and talk about. Now, neither side of the aisle is perfect. Both sides of the aisle make their mistakes. But the thing we've lost in the last maybe 20 years is the ability to sit down and reason together and work our way through a problem. And we have to get back to that, or this country will not survive.
And towards that common goal of what the Constitution does for each of us, freedom and liberty. And when we talk about patriotism, it's love of country. And so, Dr. John Farrington, thank you so much. And our quote today is going to be one of yours. So what quote would you like to leave our listeners with?
This quote I learned from Bill Ramsey, who was the CEO of the American Society of Internal Medicine. Don't sweat the little problems, and pretty soon you'll find out there aren't any big problems.
Okay.
Awesome. Well, Dr. Farrington, God bless you. Thank you for all that you've done. Everybody out there, this is the Americhicks, Molly and Kim. Every Friday is World War II Day because we love and respect the greatest generation, and what they fought for was freedom, not only for America, but for everybody around the globe, and we're going to continue to do that. So God bless you.